Well, hey guys, Gavin Koterba here from Midwest Whitetail. Unfortunately, deer season is officially over, but that doesn't mean that the deer projects ever stop. In fact, this is my personal favorite time to do that scouting for next year. There's obviously no leaves on the trees, and it makes it a lot easier to scout. So you're obviously out this time of year doing a lot of shed hunting, and you can be out there as well as looking for antlers. You can look for some of those spots for next year, look for some of that sign from the previous year, finding those fresh rubs, scrapes, and trails that are frequently used, and making note of that for the following year. Today I wanted to cover just a few tips on aerial scouting when it comes to bedding areas. And so bedding areas, specifically as it relates to deer hunting, are super important through all times of the deer hunting season. Early season, you obviously have bucks moving from that bed to food pattern primarily, and you also have that more during the late season as well. After the rut, they're trying to pack back on those calories. They want to get to an area where they're just going from point A to point B. And then obviously in the rut, you're keying in on that doe movement as well. Bucks are obviously interested in does, and so paying attention to where those doe bedding areas are, as well as where bucks are going to be traveling from bedding area to bedding area, is important to know. So really, again, bedding areas are super important to take note of. They're just a piece to the puzzle, but they're a big piece. And so it's a great thing to pay attention to when you're out scouting. Prior to doing scouting, I love getting on the map. And so onX is a great option for mapping. We use that a lot here at Midwest Whitetail. They have tons of great features. You can use it on your computer at the house and then have it out there in the field with you on your phone, marking areas, and just a lot of great features overall. First and foremost, when it comes to aerial scouting, being able to read your map is half the battle, in my opinion. onX specifically has a hybrid layer which shows you both a satellite view to show the actual vegetation and the lay of the land, and it also then has an overlay on top of that which shows you the topographical map, and that shows essentially topography or hills and draws and creeks and all those things. And being able to read that will help you a lot in just identifying bedding areas as it is. In this specific instance I have right here, there's essentially a ridge that comes from the west to the east, and you can tell that by the large V's that are jutting out, and that's in the same orientation basically. Then coming off of that, there's V's that jut up into the larger V of the ridge, and those I can tell are little drainages where water likes to seep down, and in those lower spots water will drain off of that ridge top and into a creek bottom below. So the top of the ridge being where that V, the intersection of that V essentially is, I can see that that comes again from west to the east. And then down below that, I can see that little drainage. And if I zoom in here, there's lots of little pockets of cover, but specifically right here in this little drainage, I can see there's a chunk of trees. And so one little spot like that that has a good amount of cover would be great in my eyes for a potential bedding area, especially for a buck. It's a secluded spot. A lot of times does are going to be bedding in those large areas of cover, and a buck might want to be more secluded by himself. And whether it's open country that has more open vegetation, like in this example, or if it's an open stand of hardwoods or even a thick stand of hardwoods, like out east or even in the south, some of those same things still apply when it comes to areas that have ridges and draws. A lot of times, not always, plenty of times you'll see bucks bedding in those lower ground areas, but by and large, in my experience, I've noticed they like to be on the ridge tops, especially on the point of a ridge where a ridge essentially ends and starts dropping down, and they'll want to have the wind at their back so that it's blowing over the top of their back so that they can smell anything coming in from behind them, and then being able to watch down below using basically both senses in conjunction with each other. And that allows them to feel as safe as possible, using again both senses to their utmost advantage. And that's generally a good rule of thumb when it comes to hill country bedding, again, whether open or more woody type areas. Now, when it comes to river bottom type country or just anything that's flatter, obviously that topography is not really going to give you much of an advantage. There's always small undulations in the ground, but generally it's pretty flat, and so it's not a great thing to rely on. Here, and really in both situations, but here especially, I love to look for areas of edge. That's always the old adage, deer are creatures of edge. And so here in this example, you can see it's just a nasty river bottom area. There's lots of different chunks of trees, little openings, grassy areas, all sorts of things coming together. And so here, I love to look for these types of edges. So for example, you can see at the top here, there's some trees that I can tell are a lot more mature, and reason being is because one individual tree is a lot larger. You can tell that that tree is fully extended. It's taking up a lot more of the canopy, versus down here to the right into this thicker stuff, I can see that there's all these little trees dotted around, and those, in my guess, are willows, but generally they don't get quite as big, and so those little thickets are going to be a little more tightly condensed, and you can tell that based off the map. It takes a little bit of just looking at it, trial and error, going out in the field, checking out these areas, and coming back and taking a look at it on the map. But that's a general rule of thumb when it comes to the different types of vegetation that you can look for. Right here, I can see that there's a pretty solid line of edge, multiple lines of edge, in fact. Off to the left of the screen, there's a grassy opening. In the middle, that kind of goes diagonal, there's a strip of more mature timber. And then to the right, there's a little bit more of a thicket type area. There's that big chunk of smaller trees, those little willows, if I had to guess again. And then there's some other grassy areas mixed with some willows dotted around in between. And so something like that, I can tell right away, you know, the deer are going to be bedded in that thicker cover if possible. And so those willows are going to probably be that spot that I'm keying in on first and foremost as a bedding area. And then those areas of edge are going to generally have some sort of travel routes, either alongside of them and also going in and out of them. A lot of times alongside of them, you'll see where bucks will travel, especially during the rut. They'll be wanting to cruise, especially with the wind in their favor, blowing into their face out of the bedding area. Those areas where potentially does might be. Obviously, you could potentially go in here and just guess and set up based off of some of this guesswork a little bit. But what I like to do, and probably my biggest tip of this entire idea of bedding areas, is to go out and look at them for yourself, especially this time of year. Season is well a ways. You don't really need to worry about bumping deer at this point. And the best thing to do is just check out those areas for yourself. You make your guesses on the map online, marking lots of pins where potential bedding areas might be, potential stand locations. But at the end of the day, you don't know which exact tree is going to be the one, or which exact trail is going to be the one that is the most heaviest, where deer are most frequently using. And so again, I can't stress enough, the best thing to do is to get out there and put boots on the ground and check it out for yourself. So hopefully a few of these tips help. There's a lot that goes into this, but again, a lot of it is just trial and error. Check it out on the map, make your guesses, and go see for yourself in the woods and come back and go from there. So again, hope these tips help, and we'll catch you on the next one.